go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, by the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. This is the review class, right, on the text by Arya Nagarjuna called The Praise of Dharmadhatu. So actually, I want to start by asking you guys a question. Like, for some of you are studying Lam Rim right now, and it says in the beginning of the Lam Rim, right, like one of the benefits or greatnesses of the Lam Rim is if you study Lam Rim, it says then you'll know where every teaching fits, right, in your practice, at what point you should focus on. So, so my question is, at what point, this text, right, at what points, right, this text by Nagarjuna, right, at what points in your practice would you focus on this?
30 years from now.
Is that which section of the Lam Rim is that? Actually, that's pretty good. That's assuming pretty fast practice. Progress, that's good. Does anybody have thoughts? Like, I don't think it's just one. I think there are at least two, maybe 3 points. So where would a person who's practicing Lam Rim, right, who's practicing the stages of the path to enlightenment, at what points would they focus on this? The teachings in this text by Nagarjuna. Gabe's going to say 5 years.
Oh, when you say at what point, do you mean like at what point in the, like when you look at the Lam Rim teachings, at which part of it?
Yeah, because that's the idea, right? So like one of the things it says in the Lam Rim, right, is if you study Lam Rim well, right, if you really understand the Lam Rim, it says then you'll understand the Buddha's intention and all the different texts. Like even there's like those things where it says every word of the Buddha, you'll understand that it's for your own practice at a certain point in your practice, right? But like, so I'll give a hint, right? Like this text is not about impermanence. Right? That's not its main topic.
No.
So it wouldn't be when you're meditating on impermanence, you wouldn't say, oh, this is, you wouldn't, like, if somebody said, oh, praise the Dharmadhatu by Nagarjuna, great, I'll meditate on that when I'm on the section on impermanence, you would say, oh, something's awry. That person doesn't know how to integrate all the teachings into their own practice.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is like, so yeah, what point, which of the state, like which, you know what I mean? So like which topics of Lam Rim, where would you say, oh, now I can supplement what the Lam Rim's text says with this, which is actually the same teaching, in other words, it integrates right there and it'll help my practice more deeply.
Yeah, so I would say emptiness, when you when you go into development of wisdom, understanding emptiness. Yeah. You said there's two.
I think 2 or 3.
Oh, really?
I think 2 at least, but that's a very important one.
I think that's the only one I can see.
Any other thoughts? Anybody else have other, or is everybody just saying?
For 30 years, I'm down with that too.
We actually had an interesting talk. We had an interesting discussion about this recently on what's it called? Like there was like discussion forum from FPMT, and it was actually Venerable Wangmo raised this as a question about Buddha nature. She wasn't talking about this text specifically, which I think she was talking about the Uttara Tantra. She said at what point, and there was an interesting discussion about this topic, and so for sure, right, one of the points would be emptiness, since that's one of the topics we thought about. A second point where this could be relevant is when you're trying to develop bodhicitta, right? So there are the, whichever method you're using, right, there comes a point where you develop the unusual attitude of universal responsibility, right? But then in between developing the unusual attitude of universal responsibility, you have to then generate bodhicitta, which is the wish to achieve Buddhahood, right? To generate actual bodhicitta, you have to believe that you yourself can become a Buddha. Right? Not just believe somebody became a Buddha, but you have to believe it's possible for you to become a Buddha, right? So if you have doubts about that, then it would be hard to generate. Whereas if you say, well, I don't think I'm capable, if you have low self-esteem, right? Then how could you generate? So the teaching on Buddha nature could be useful at that point also, right? Whereas to say, because of my mind is in the nature of Buddha nature, therefore it's possible for me to become a Buddha, therefore I can generate bodhicitta and wish to achieve Buddhahood. So that would be another point, sure, where this would be relevant, where this would be important this could be helpful in your actual practice of Lam Rim. Does that make sense? Because you say, oh, if you didn't believe that, if you said, oh yeah, the great, people have that attitude, don't you see that? Like sometimes people say, oh, of course someone like Shakyamuni Buddha or Amitabha Buddha, or they could become Buddha, but someone like me, oh, I don't think it's possible. Like people have that feeling, right? So this is also an antidote to that, right? This idea that that we have Buddha nature. So I think those are the two main points for this meditative.
So like Buddha nature, right? But you have to meditate on the emptiness in order to realize Buddha nature, right?
Well, actually, now let's get into that. Good question. So let's let's look. What is Buddha nature? That was the next point anyway. So good. So what is Buddha nature, right? So actually, I want to say something about that because so Kenshin Rinpoche actually, when we said we would do, he said, oh, good to do a review and particularly talk about Buddha nature at the beginning. So, right. So the main topic of this text, as you were just saying, is Buddha nature, right? Or like Buddha lineage, maybe is a better. Buddha nature. Actually, one thing that's interesting is that I think I said this once before. Apparently, I mean, I'm no Sanskritist, and I don't speak Tibetan, but translators say actually there's not really a Sanskrit or Tibetan term that's commonly used that would really accurately translate as Buddha nature. That was just something that Westerners developed the term. So Tibetans use the term rig, which means like lineage, family, or something. So you're rig. Which I think means like you're in the Buddha family, the Buddha lineage. Your Buddha lineage. That would be a more literal translation, but because it's become popular, we say Buddha nature. So I think what's important is this: is that Kenshin Rinpoche mentioned this specifically to emphasize this point, that there are two types of Buddha nature. So there's what they call, and we call them. The first is natural Buddha nature, and the second is developing Buddha nature. And so the natural Buddha nature, right, is the ultimate nature of your own mind, right, which is so it means also another way of saying the same thing is to say the emptiness of your own mind, because you're from, again, this is taught by Nagarjuna, right? So it's from following the middle way school, philosophical school of Buddhist thought. Right, so according to the middle way school, the the natural Buddha nature is what we could say the ultimate nature of your mind, which is a synonym for saying the emptiness of your own mind. And then there's the second type is the developing Buddha nature, which is the sometimes they say it's the clear and knowing aspect of your mind, or the you say the clear or luminous. Sometimes they say the luminous. That's, I think Tasha used the term luminous. So the luminous nature of mind, and that's actually that's the mind that can develop, right? So it can, in other words, it can develop these positive qualities, and that's said to become the cause. In this system, that's said to become the cause of the form bodies, the various form bodies of the Buddha. Yeah.
So is nature and aspect the same thing in that context?
What do you mean by aspect?
Because you said clear and knowing, and developing, clear and knowing, it could be said that's the nature of the mind, is clear and knowing, or the aspect of the mind.
Oh, I see. Like the clear, I guess you have to differentiate. So the natural Buddha nature, so the nature gets confusing because it's two different terms.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, here we'd have to say the first one, like, it's interesting.
I mean, I kind of get what you're saying about the natural
Right,
way.
you get that one.
Right, but in the developing one, you said that's basically clear and knowing. But is it a clear and knowing aspect of the mind, or you said aspect or nature of the mind?
Yeah, it's a little tricky in a way. I'm just pausing because I guess we'd have to actually, if you really want to follow the middle way school's position, you'd have to say conventionally that the conventional nature of the mind is clear and known. Because if you say the nature without sort of qualifying that,
Right.
then they would say, well, the mind has no inherent nature.
Right.
So you have to be a little careful with phrasing that.
Right.
So you could say that the conventional nature of the mind is clear and knowing. Yeah, I think that's the best way. That would probably be the most precise way.
Yeah.
I think. Because clear and actually, and that's an important point, right? That because from the middle way school's position, clear and knowing is not the ultimate nature of mind. Luminosity is not the ultimate nature of mind.
Right.
Also, like there's like, and that would actually be Lama Tsongkhapa actually argues against those kinds.
Contradict.
Whereas if you say those are the ultimate nature of mind, he would say that's completely wrong. Actually, but you could say those are. You could say that, right? They're conventional.
So you're saying like developing Buddha nature is conventional mind?
Yeah, it's a conventional phenomenon. And then the natural Buddha nature is ultimate. Yeah, I'm just sorry, pause. This is another point where, actually in a different text, right? I think it's an Ocean of Reasoning, where Nagarjuna makes this whole point, right? Do things have a nature? And he says, yes, they have nature, emptiness. And I said, do they have any other nature? The nature of things is emptiness. He argues very strongly against saying that things can have any nature other than emptiness. That's their actual nature. So any other nature has to be conventional. It's conventional object. And one other thing I'll say about this Buddha nature, there are sometimes where they talk about the mind being either clear or luminous. And this is important, like the word clear, so let's use the word clear, right? Or even sometimes they have the term clear light or clear as the nature of mind. And even that word can have two different meanings in Buddhist philosophy. Sometimes clear means luminous. It's a conventional. In other words, it's clear in the sense that it's unobstructed, right? So that's a conventional. And then sometimes clear means empty of inherent existence. So even that word clear can imply both of the two types of Buddha nature. Does that make sense? So sometimes, in text, sometimes it uses the word clear, but you have to know the context of what's the author talking about, and not to confuse the two. Because if you confuse the two, then you're confusing the conventional and the ultimate. So it's two different meanings. So then the text, the text after sort of presenting the topic, right, which is Buddha nature, the text presents. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the text presents, as is usually done with Buddha nature. The text uses metaphors in the next section, right? And by the way, remember this, remember the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, by the Buddha, right? So actually, this text, so the first turning of the wheel is when the Buddha taught the 4 Noble Truths, right? In Sarnath, that was that, right? The second turning of the wheel of Dharma was the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, right? The Prajnaparamita Sutras, which were taught on Vulture's Peak, right? We say that in the Heart Sutra, right? Where those focused explicitly and mainly on emptiness. And then the third turning of the wheel, one of the essential topics of that was Buddha nature. So Khenpo Rinpoche pointed out that this text by Nagarjuna is commenting on both the last two, right? It's commenting on both the second and the third turning of the wheel. So it's teaching both emptiness and Buddha nature in an integrated way. And so, so then Nagarjuna here gives numerous metaphors. I'm not going to go through all of them, but let's just pick one, right? So the one I'll pick the example of verses 5 and 6 is one metaphor, where it talks about the butter lamp that burns inside a vase would not even be slightly visible as long as left inside the afflictions vase, and the Dharmadhatu is not visible. Right. So there he's saying Dharmadhatu means Buddha nature. And here he's giving the example that our Buddha nature is like a lamp, right? Because it's luminous, right? We said that, and luminous can have two different meanings, as we said, right? It could mean the conventional nature of mind, or luminous could also imply the ultimate nature of emptiness in this context. So then he's saying, he's giving this metaphor, right? So you've got this lamp that's light, right? And then you've got a vase covering it, and he's saying here, if the vase is completely covering it and has no holes, then if you're in a dark room and you put you put a vase that's tight on the bottom, you won't see any light at all, right? And then he says, in verse 6, if one perforates the surface of the vase, whatever holes are made in whichever directions, through those and in precisely those directions, light will shine as it is its nature to do. Right? So that's verse 1. And so here, this is just one of the metaphors, right? All the metaphors each metaphor he uses talks about something being hidden by something. There's something you can't, it's there, but you can't perceive it, right? And what he's saying is that for ordinary people like us, right, we have this Buddha nature, right? It's the nature. It's the nature of our own mind, right? So, in that sense, it's never separate from us, right? But we never perceive it, right? We never access it. We never notice it, because it's like the lamp that's completely hidden by this covering, right? And then what he's saying is, if you start to poke holes in the covering, you see that much. However many holes you poked, right, you can see that much of it. And if you keep poking holes, eventually, if you destroy the entire vase, then you can see the lamp perfectly. So this metaphor he's giving, first of all, and all the metaphors are like this. So this idea there's something hidden, right? And it's like right there, but we can't see it, right? So that's the idea, right, is that the emptiness of our own mind is never apart from the mind, right? But our minds never see that emptiness, right? And so then we have to, so sometimes they talk about so if we have Buddha nature, how can we allow ourselves to see that Buddha nature, right? For it to be revealed, let's say. Another metaphor he gives is like milk. And he says, if you look at a glass of whole milk, you don't see any butter there, right? But if you churn that milk, you find butter in it, right? It's like the nature of, it has everything in it to make butter, but if you just look at the milk, you'll never see any butter. You have to churn it, right? So that's like we have to practice, right? We have to practice the Dharma. The same way poking the holes in the vase is like we have to practice, right? And then we can reveal our Buddha nature. And in this case, Khenchen Rinpoche gave, using this metaphor actually of the butter lamp, what Khenchen Rinpoche's commentary was that, right, so we're going to get into this a little more in a few minutes, but there are 5 paths and 10 grounds in the Mahayana, right, in Mahayana Bodhisattva practice, right? And so really what Khenchen Rinpoche's commentary was that as you start to, the 10 grounds are the poking holes in the vase, and then finally when you achieve Buddhahood, that's like the vase is completely destroyed, right? In other words, that the lamp of your Buddha nature is completely revealed when you're a Buddha. Up until that point, we have to poke holes in it by realizing emptiness, which is what happens on the Bodhisattva bhumis, or grounds. So that's, in a sense, our practice is that, right? Our practice is to overcome the obscurations that obscure us from seeing, or obstruct us, rather, from seeing our Buddha nature. And what are those, by the way? So those are the afflictions, right? The various many different afflictions, and then their imprints, right? The imprints of the afflictions, which are subtler than the imprints themselves, right? And you can see that, right? Like, in other words, sometimes you have, actually, because nobody has in other words, sometimes you're filled with desire, but then when you're really angry, you're not filled with desire because you're too angry, right? And then when you're very, very jealous, like, you're too caught up in jealousy to be caught up in desire or something, right? Then when you're overcome with ignorance, you're maybe too too confused to even get angry or something. So we don't always have all the afflictions, right? But having had them since beginningless time, we have the imprints for them to come back, right? And part of becoming a Buddha is getting rid of all the afflictions and then all their imprints. Right? And so getting rid of all of those is the way we reveal our Buddha nature. So maybe I'll pause there and see if there's anybody have any comments or questions.
On the natural Buddha nature and developing Buddha nature, then Mahamudra, is that the natural Buddha nature?
Good question. Yeah, so Mahamudra. So one, Kent Rinpoche said a number of things about this. Like, so, and actually if you, so if you look at, actually, like, I think Kent Rinpoche based his explanation of Mahamudra in this context on, there's a text about Mahamudra by the first Panchen Lama, those in Chökyi Gyaltsen. And what that text says is that it's almost like for the real meaning of Mahamudra is meditation on the ultimate nature of mind, on the emptiness of the mind itself. But then what that text says is for beginners who haven't yet developed calm abiding meditation, there's a skillful method where one identifies the conventional nature of the mind. So it's luminosity or it's clear knowing nature. And one concentrates on that in order to develop calm abiding. You know, so like, because to develop calm abiding, you can focus on any given object, right? So some people meditate on it, you know, like a three-dimensional image of the Buddha, or some people meditate on a syllable, but what the Mahamudra tradition says is one very skillful way of developing calm abiding is to meditate on the conventional nature of the mind as a skillful means to develop concentration, right? Calm abiding and samadhi. But then in that text, what the Panchen Lama says is some people, because in other words, because when one develops this ability to meditate on this clear, knowing nature of mind, its aspect is sort of, you know, clear, spacious, you know, and at a certain point, if one develops deep concentration, it's free of conceptual, you know, free of gross conceptual thoughts, and so what he points out kind of is that some meditators in Tibet mistook that for emptiness, but he says that's a mistake. Actually, in other words, so there's a skillful method at the for beginners in Mahamudra to meditate on the conventional nature of mind. But then the Panchen Lama says the real meaning of Mahamudra is having gained that concentration, one then uses kind of a corner of the mind to look at the mind itself, and then to do the reasoning to understand emptiness. And then one realizes, and he kind of says, if you've gotten good at meditation on the conventional nature of mind, which is this kind of spacious, you know, subtle thing to meditate on, you know, then if you apply this kind of reasoning from the tradition of Arya Nagarjuna, you know, which we'll get to in a little while, you know, but to sort of meditate on the emptiness of that, and then it's easier to realize the emptiness of that, and that's the actual Mahamudra practice, is this meditation on the ultimate nature of mind, on the emptiness of the mind. But he points that out, that there's a danger, and you can see that actually, you know, if somebody gets very good at meditating on this kind of, you know, they're feeling kind of very, there's a kind of, just naturally, if you develop calm abiding, there's a sense of bliss and pliancy, right, physical and mental sort of flexibility and serviceableness and joy, and then the sort of appearances without gross sort of ideation, gross conceptualization, and this appearance is, and there's a kind of an aspect of appearance of the mind that's very spacious. You can see how somebody could think, oh, that must be emptiness. And what the first Panchen Lama and Khenpo Rinpoche followed, his sort of approach, you know, sort of says is, you know, don't mistake that for emptiness. In other words, that's the conventional nature of mind, this luminosity or clarity and knowing. And he says, but then you have to still meditate on the emptiness of that. And so that's the actual Mahamudra.
So the first part's kind of like just a conceptual understanding, and then the second part would be a direct realization?
No, the first part's not even a conceptual understanding of emptiness. It's just it'd be like, a better way to say this is like, so, remember like sometimes in here we would meditate on the emptiness of a chair, right? And we'd say, is the chair its legs, is it its back, is it the cushion on the bottom, is it the fabric, is it like that, right? So, because remember this, in order to meditate on emptiness, you have to have a conventional phenomena, right? In other words, emptiness isn't some place or some, like, you know, heavenly realm that we're going to go to. You have to have a conventional phenomena, right? Or like sometimes we did it on you, actually, right? Like, so we would say, you know, is Mike his nose, is his ear, right? So you have to have a conventional phenomena And then you do ultimate analysis of that conventional phenomena. And under ultimate analysis, you realize, oh, it has no self-nature. So really what this is that first, so in this case, the conventional phenomena is the mind itself. Does that make sense? So it's not yet even a conceptual understanding of emptiness. It's actually just finding the conventional phenomena that, for instance, I'm not going to meditate, in this case, right, if you're doing Mahamudra, you would say, well, I'm not going to meditate on the emptiness of a chair. I'm not going to meditate on the emptiness of night. I'm going to meditate on the emptiness of my own mind. But then, so first, when it says, well, first I have to notice and get familiar with that conventional phenomena before I can meditate on its emptiness. And so the first part is getting good at recognizing and concentrating on that conventional phenomena, which is the mind itself. Right? And then having gotten good at meditating on and sort of identifying and seeing, oh, now I understand what the mind is, right? Just like I have to know, whereas if I had never met Mike, I couldn't say, well, is Mike his beard, because I wouldn't know if he had a beard or not, right? But now that I know you, I could say, is Mike his beard? You know, so like, that you have to know the conventional mind. So that early part is not a conceptual understanding of emptiness. What it is just getting to know the conventional thing, object, and then having gotten good at understanding, oh, that's, this is the conventional nature of my mind, and seeing easily, one becomes very good at sort of seeing its clarity, seeing its knowing nature, seeing how it's luminous, seeing how, and then, and one concentrates on that, right? And so that's just the conventional. Then when one does this meditation, analyzing its ultimate nature, one does the same thing what one did when one said, does Mike have inherent existence? Now we're saying, does the mind that I now see through my meditation, does that have inherent existence? And then by analyzing in that way, one actually then develops first a conceptual understanding of a concept, like you could call it like a Mahamudra, but at this point it would be by with a still conceptual understanding, right? That one actually, but it would be very deep experience for that person, but they wouldn't see it directly yet, right? So but that would already be the ultimate nature, and then by familiarizing with that, they would eventually gain the direct realization of the emptiness of the mind. So does that make better sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So so the first part is really more of it's just getting familiar with the conventional and developing concentration on it. So it would almost be like if one were to do the chair, right? So if one were to say, okay, identify the chair, no one would do this, but everyone said like, okay, now I'm going to I'm going to develop calm abiding on a chair, right? And so it had a mental image of a chair, and one sort of developed one calm abiding. That would not be an ultimate truth. That would just be, I have this image of a chair that I'm meditating on. Then one has to still say, does that chair inherently exist or not? And that's the ultimate analysis. So, yeah, same, it would be like that.
So it's like let's say, like you say, like inferential, like, before you realize direct emptiness, right?
Yeah, so the inferential would be,
Come abiding?
no. No, so the inferential would come after you, in Mahamudra, first you would develop this calm abiding on the mind, right? And the inferential understanding of emptiness would be when you say, does that mind inherently exist? And then you would analyze that.
The mind of come abiding, or?
Yeah, the mind itself that you're calm abiding on, right? You would analyze that. You would say, does that exist inherently or not? See, that's all. In order to gain an inferential understanding of emptiness, right? You have to do an ultimate analysis where you're inferring. Inferring means like using analysis, right? Using logic to come to a conclusion about something. So that just the calm abiding, that's just looking at a conventional mind, right? But the inferential, right? The inferential understanding of emptiness, that comes when you say, does that mind exist inherently or not? And then you check. Right? And then through logic, you infer, no, it doesn't have any inherent existence. That's the inferential understanding of emptiness. At that moment, when the person realizes inferentially, not directly, but inferentially, by analyzing, does this mind have any inherent nature? And they check, and then if they realize it doesn't, that's when they have the inferential understanding of emptiness. Does that make sense? And if they keep meditating on that, then it becomes direct. But according to the way Lama Tsongkhapa explains it, you don't gain a direct realization of emptiness until after you've gained an inferential. In other words, it's always in order. First one gains an inferential understanding of emptiness, and then by continuing to familiarize with that, eventually it becomes a direct perception. So you have to do the inferential first.
You have to realize come abiding first, yeah?
Actually, it can go in either order. According to the, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche said this, that So in terms of inferential understanding of emptiness, the inferential one, that can some bodhisattvas realize that before they realize calm abiding, and some realize it after they've realized calm abiding. So some people, just like when they're debating or contemplating, they get an inferential understanding of emptiness. But they haven't yet. That person might not have yet realized calm abiding, but they gain still a correct reasoning, understanding, and it's very deep. But to gain the direct perception of emptiness, you have to have calm abiding first. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's good. We're actually other questions. This is good. People are asking things. Is that clear about the Mahamudra now? Because that's important distinction, right? Because actually, Ken Rinpoche said otherwise, like people have a misunderstanding of that.
Calm abiding is just a tool.
Yeah.
On the back.
Yeah, calm abiding is just a tool. That's right. Yeah, I think Ken Rinpoche gave one metaphor for that, where he said, like, if somebody wants to cut down a tree, right, that it's like the correct understanding of emptiness is like the sharp axe, but calm abiding is like a strong arm, right? So the person has to have a strong arm, and that actually I could say kind of a Fidel's quote, right? In other words, the person can have the very perfect axe, right? That's the inferential understanding of emptiness. But they won't realize emptiness directly unless they also have the strong arm that can cut the tree. So the calm abiding is like the strong arms, and the correct inferential understanding is like the sharp axe. And if you combine those two, then you can chop down the tree. But if you have strong arms and no axe, it's not going to cut down. Right? If you keep punching a tree, it'll fall down. So maybe I wanted to, so then we were going to go to the section from, let's just briefly do a little review the section from last time. And then Wilhelmina had a question, so we'll get to that in a second. She emailed me a question. But, the next section actually gets at uses the six senses, and gets at talks about how each of them is Dharmadhatu, right? So that starts on verse 38. Right, and this was confusing last time, so I thought I'll just briefly review it because I think it was a little confusing. So verse 38, so he starts with the eye, and then he does the same thing with each of the other senses. So I'll read first verse 38, right? When an eye and form assume their right relation, appearances appear without blur. Since these neither arise nor cease, they are Dharmadhatu, though they are imagined to be otherwise. And then he does the same thing for ear and nose, tongue, body and mind. And we'll do the mind one, that was Mina's question. But let's start with the eye. So just because this was an important point that was remember, there are many different, so to meditate on emptiness, right, one has to do an ultimate analysis, right, which means one has to use reasoning. And then, in a sense, Swami Dalai Lama often says this, right? All the different reasonings to understand emptiness, if you look carefully, they come down to dependent arising, right? That dependent arising is a synonym for, or implies emptiness, and emptiness implies dependent arising. But then there are different reasonings which are kind of which all come down to the same thing, which is dependent arising, right? So this verse, right, is clearly getting at dependent arising, right? So it's saying, and this was important. This is the part that was confusing last time for those of you who were there, right? So what Ken Rinpoche was explaining is, for for an experience of vision to arise, there have to be three factors. So the first one he was describing, which I guess got confusing, I think, was there's, what I think the best term is the eye sense power. Right? And so that means you have to have a functioning eye that has, and the sense power, they call it like a subtle form inside. So it's like, there's the eyeball, and then within that there's a subtle form that's sensitive to light, right? That's sensitive for vision. So it's not, there's a gross eyeball, but inside that, so from, I don't know, to me it's quite, actually I sometimes think that if you were in, let's say right, now we have to talk about what, rods and cones and nerve endings, right? But if you were in ancient India, we're trying to describe nerve endings, you could say a subtle form. I think it's a reasonable description, actually. But so you have to have a functioning eye sense power, right? Then there also has to be an object to be seen, right? And then there has to be consciousness, right? Whereas even if you have a corpse with a, if somebody had perfectly functioning eyes and then they died 8 or 10 hours ago and they're laying there, and you open their eyeball, they're not going to see anything, right? Because there has to be a consciousness also, right? And so what Ken Rinpoche was saying here is that what it says here, the eye and form assume their right relation, appearances appear without a blur. The implication there is that there has to be 3 different factors, right? All those 3. So the eye sense power, a visual object, and a consciousness. And when those 3 are all in their correct relationship, then in an illusion-like manner, visual appearances appear. And then he says, since these neither arise nor cease, they are Dharmadhatu, though they are imagined to be otherwise, right? So what it's getting at here is that things appear to us, I don't say it correctly. So the eye, actually the consciousness, all 3 of those actually appear to us as if they have inherent nature, as if they're inherently existent. That's what it means, they are imagined to be otherwise. Imagine means we see them as having their own inherent nature, and then we believe in that appearance. Whereas in reality, that appearance is completely false. Does that make sense? That's why I say, although they are imagined to be otherwise, right? And so what we're imagining is that the consciousness, the object, and the sense, seeing, all those things are inherently existent. And what Nagarjuna here is saying is, no, they're Dharmadhatu, means they're emptiness. And he says, they neither arise nor cease. Now, actually, like in other words, for us, if somebody said, actually, if you read that, it might sound poetic or something, but actually, if you really start to say, like, so your seeing never arose, right? If you really start to, if you think of that, then you would almost want to argue. You'd want to argue against that. You say, of course, my seeing arose. I saw a lot of things in my life. Right? It wouldn't. If you actually, you should, in a way, you should feel that way, right? Because we grasp quite strongly at things having an inherent nature, and Nagarjuna is saying, no, they don't have an inherent nature. So, in one way, right, there are different, so this is getting at, what this is getting at, let's go into it a little bit. What this is getting at is the reasonings now, right, the reasonings for understanding emptiness. These verses are bringing that up, right. But so, remember, let's go a little bit into this, right, so remember, like, to meditate on emptiness, there has to be, the first step, Lama Tsongkhapa always explains it, right, the first step is to identify the object of negation. In other words, you have to identify in your own experience what you're imagining that actually, that you're going to check, does that really exist or not, right? Because, as Lama Tsongkhapa often says, we're not negating mere appearance of visual perception. Whereas that happens, right? Conventionally, people see things. What we're trying to identify is there some inherent nature? Is there some truly existent or inherent thing that's seeing? Is there a truly existent independent seer, seen, or object of seeing? Does that make sense? The question. That's the question for analysis. And so, how do you identify in your own experience the object of negation? Right? And actually, for that, since Wilhelmina asked, let's jump ahead to verse 43, because Wilhelmina asked about this one. So it's the same thing, but this one is about the mental consciousness, right? So let's read that verse, verse 43. But the phenomena that appear to the mental consciousness, and then chief of them all, right? The chief of them all means the mental consciousness is the most important, right? Which is Mahamudra, right? This is what we've been talking about. That you can meditate on the emptiness of anything, but since the mind is what creates samsara or nirvana, mind is chief of them all because it creates happiness and unhappiness, it creates samsara and nirvana, right? So the phenomena that appear to the mind, to the mental consciousness, which is chief of them all, are conceptualized and then superimposed. When this activity is abandoned, phenomana's lack of self-essence is known. Knowing this, meditate on the Dharmadhatu. So really that verse is about Mahamudra, which you asked, right? But it's the same point as the I consciousness. Right now it's just about the mental consciousness, right? So if you wanted to meditate on that, right? Now this is talking about the act of perception, right? So the others were seeing, right? This one is thinking, basically. This is saying meditate on the emptiness of thinking. And so let's use an example, right? So because we want to get at the object of negation. And remember for us, like in the text on meditation on emptiness, it talks about there's always ignorance grasping at true existence for us. But for beginners, it's useful to start with something where it's more, where the sense of self-existence is more intense, right? So let's give an example of a thought, right? So like, imagine, so actually we can do this, right? Here is, the mind's nature, right, is clear and known, right? So then, when the mind, and I was talking about phenomena that appear to mental consciousness, right? So if you bring to mind an object that you strongly grasp at with desire, right? I'm just giving, because we're picking one because it's, then there's more of a sense, an experiential sense of inherent existence. And so if you bring to mind an object that you grasp at strongly with desire, right? So now remember, like, watch the process though, right? So there's, like, first you're not thinking, maybe you're thinking about what I'm talking about, right? Or maybe you're not, maybe you're thinking about like, what you're gonna have for lunch or whatever, right? Which maybe is your object of desire, so good. But then you're ahead of the game. But, okay, so like, but imagine, so your mind is not focused on a particular thing, right, this object, then you bring this object to mind, right? And check, as soon as you bring the object to mind, right, as soon, and now, and do an object that's not here present, so just for this particular exercise, right? As soon as you bring that object to mind, right, notice how it feels, right? There's actually an experience, if you check for your own experience, right? There is, where that object, even though it's only in your, right, or as we say, it's only in your mind, right? But you check, there's like a feeling of, oh, that, right? The feeling is like, that's real, because I want it, right? If you didn't, or if it doesn't feel real to you, you wouldn't want it, right? So whatever it is you desire, just by bringing it to mind, then there's some feeling, oh, that's real, right? This object, it feels like it's there, actually. That's why I'm pointing, right? That's the experience. Oh, that's real, right? What am I pointing at? It's only in my mind, actually, right? But that's the experience, right? So there's this experience of, oh, that's that. It feels like it's real, right? And then if I want it, there's a feeling of I, right? There's a feeling of the perceiver, right? The perceiver seems real, the object seems real, and the way of knowing in this case is with desire, right? It's a way of knowing an object, right? Whereas a way of misknowing an object, actually, right? But the quality of the mind in this case, because we're using the example of desire, is that, right? And so actually check, right? In other words, if you get caught up in desire also, right? Actually, the desire seems very, when you're really like craving something, the desire seems as, what does Lama Zopa Rinpoche say sometimes? Like, it seems as real as the Rocky Mountains, or as real as the Himalayas. It's like, that desire, actually the Himalayas at least can shake and fall down, they have reason, right? But the desire seems like so concrete, right? He's getting at the object of negation, he describes that, right? And so, now we can understand when he says, when Nagarjuna said earlier, right, conceptualized and then superimposed, right? So in other words, we're superimposing the sense of reality. the sense of inherent existence or inherent reality on the mind that's knowing, on the object that's known, and on the act of thinking, in this case, thinking with desire. And so the question we're raising, right, is, now you can't, this gets at conventional versus ultimate, so this is really an important point. Nobody's saying, like, if I just said, bring to mind something that you desire, right, and think about it for a moment, right? Nobody's asking the question, what we're not asking now is, did you just think of something that you desire, right? That's not what we're asking. Now we're going to do ultimate analysis, right? So in other words, so let's pick the example of that we just did, right? So in other words, is there an inherently existent, right, or existent from its own side, object of desire, subject, and process, right, and desiring? Does that make sense? That's the question. It feels very real. It feels like they exist, for sure, if you check, right? That's the object of negation. It really feels like they exist. Each one exists from its own side. And can you get that feeling, actually? Like, I just want to pause. Can you get that feeling? If you, you can, you know, I'm using an example of desire, right? But can you get that feeling that that there's the knower, the known, and the process of knowing, and they all feel very concrete or feel real? So then, there are many different reasonings we can use at this point, right? One simple one that Nagarjuna is implying here, right, is, well, each, you know, is like, on one level you could say but actually it's clear, right, that there is the object known depends on the knower. Right? The knower depends on the object known. The act of knowing depends on the knower, right? So they're dependently arisen, so they don't have, that's a simplistic way of saying it. Another way of saying it, though, in this earlier verse, right, he says unarisen. So there's another one, right? I'll just go through this, right? Okay, so let's go through this one. Actually, I'm trying to think which one to do. There are many, many different reasonings. Nagarjuna, actually, on these topics, Nagarjuna, Ocean of Reasoning, which I mentioned to you, Ocean of Reasoning, Nagarjuna presents many different lines of reasoning to refute these concepts of inherent existence. Actually, I'll do this one. Actually, there are many different meditations that one can do here. I want to do one about, actually, Nagarjuna used one, the desire and the desirous one. So let's do that one briefly. Right? So, okay, if desire exists inherently, right? When you're caught in strong desire, it certainly feels like I'm inherently existent, desire is inherently existent. Right? So Nagarjuna says this point. He says, so if desire and the desirous one are inherently existent, then there are only three possibilities. Now this comes to logical reason. There are only three possibilities, right, if they're inherently existent. One is that the desirous one comes first and gives rise to desire. The second is that desire comes first and gives rise to the desirous one. Or the third is that they arise simultaneously. Logically, those are the only three possibilities. And so then he says, okay, let's go through each. Right? And so the first one is this, it's funny. If the desirous one exists before desire, then how is it the desirous one, right? And he says, then there has to be two, then you're the desirous one who desire, to be the desirous one you have to have desire, right? But how can it exist before desire, right? And then when the desire arises, there would somehow be two desires. He says, but if you experience check, there's only one desire at that moment. So that makes no sense, right? Whereas the desirous one can exist before desire because it's not a desirous one, because it's not having any desire. So he says, so obviously it's silly to say the desirous one exists before desire. Because there is no desire. So then the label desirous one would be meaningless. Then he says, right, just as silly, basically, just as ridiculous to say there's desire with no desirous one. Whereas because desire, by its very nature, implies that there is a subject and an object, right? The subject wants the object. Right? So if there's no subject, to want anything, then desire can't arise, right? Desire requires a mind, a consciousness, right? So there can't be some kind of desire with no consciousness, right? Desire is a quality of consciousness, actually. Right? So there can't be desire without a desirous one, without a mind that gives rise to that desire. So then he says, so the only possibility left, right? So we're still kind of keeping that object of negation in mind, right? So okay, so now we're starting to say, okay, so there is no desirous one before the desire. There's also no desire before the desirous one. Those are easy. Right? But then how about simultaneous? Maybe they arise simultaneously. And then Nagarjuna points out, he says, so for something that exists inherently by its own nature, right? It has to have, or that's what we're asking. Does it exist inherently? Does it exist by its own nature? So he says, then they can't be mutually dependent. Something that exists by its own nature, right? If desire exists by its own nature, it can't be dependent on the desirous one. And if the desirous one exists by its own nature, it can't be dependent upon something else. And what he says is, if you say that desire and the desirous one are simultaneous and each have their own nature, then they're unrelated, like an apple in China and an orange in California. They're not connected. Right? And he says, so then there's no such thing. It's impossible for them to be. And also, actually, he says another thing on that topic, which is he says, for two unrelated things to be simultaneous is actually not. If two things have their own inherent nature and are simultaneous, it's actually not significant even to say they're simultaneous. It's just a coincidence if they happen to exist at the same time. But if you look at desire, desirous one, they exist in mutual dependence, right? In other words, each depends on the other. Right? So neither one has its own nature. So now before we had the sense of a desire that seemed like it was self-existent, but actually it has no nature at all from its own side. Right? And then it seemed like the subject, right, my own mind, had its own nature, but actually it completely lacks that nature. Right? And when you sort of have this experience of seeing that lack of having its own nature, right, that means it's empty of having its own nature. So that's one example of it. That's an example of a line of reasoning to meditate on emptiness. Through mutual, right? And in a sense, you see how like there's one is saying, did this come first, did that come first, are they simultaneous? But if you analyze more deeply, you see it's coming down to dependent arising. Like they're mutually dependent, therefore they lack an inherent nature. But it's a line of reasoning. One line of reasoning is which did one come first, did the other come first, or are they simultaneous? We could go through lots of different lines of reasoning to meditate on emptiness for this, right? There's one of the unarisen, there's one of same or different, identical or different, right? Again, they all come down to dependent arising. It's up to you guys. Do you want to do more lines? Do you have questions, or do you want to go through other lines of reasoning? But there's other stuff we want to cover still. But I want to. This is the actual point, right? Of where what sort of say of meditation on emptiness, which is what we're doing here, which is the Dharmadhatu, right? So when one looks at the mind, right? In this case, I was giving an example, the mind of desire, right? So when one looks at that mind and it feels like it has some inherent nature, right? Like conceptualized and then superimposed, right? As he says here, right? So we're conceptualizing an inherent nature to the subject, and we're believing in that inherent nature. And then when we meditate and we realize it lacks that inherent nature, right? It's empty of that. That's the meditation on Dharmadhatu. Actually, let me pause. Are there questions?
I have a question. Like I always like this. My question I always have is like, like here 42.
Hmm?
So, I mean, my question is like, what is the body?
What is what?
The body.
The body?
Yeah.
The body is pure. So what is the question then?
Because like you can say the eye has like eye organs, right?
Mhm.
And the ear, and then tongue, and what about the body? What's the body's organ?
Oh, so in this case, what they're talking about when they say the body,
Yeah.
they're talking about of the five senses, touch. So in this case, what they're talking, or is on that verse anyway, because they're talking about the six senses, right? So there's seeing, hearing, smelling, taste, touch, and thought.
Mhm.
So in this case, they're talking about touch. They're talking about, like, you could say in modern talk, we talk about the nerves.
Uh-huh.
So this is talking about the sense of touch, right? So if you touch, you can feel like this is rough, this is smooth. So it's that kind of in this case, when they talk about what does it say here? The body, the pure body's essence, the characteristic of the object to be touched. So here, what they're talking about is of the six senses is the sense of touch,
Okay.
which is different than the sense of hearing, right? Like let's say like a blind person can touch, right,
Mhm.
and can feel, oh, this is a wall, this is like that. Does that answer the question?
So what's the know? What's the seeing? What's the known and knowing? Like.
And then knowing would be objects of mind. Like, so what we just did, like because in other words, let's say, I'll give two different examples, right? Like right now, I just heard you, right? And then I also saw you, right?
Mhm.
But then later, let's say later, if I'm driving home and then I think, oh, Fidel asked a good question, right? Then I have a mental knowing of Fidel. That's not my eye consciousness, not my ear consciousness. I'm not shaking your hand, right? It's a mental knowing. I mean, so that's the mental consciousness that's knowing Fidel at that time.
Okay.
I'm just giving you an example. Right?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So the body is a combination of all the senses.
No, in this case, the body is touch. Like so again, not all the senses, because in this sense, it's not hearing, right? Like it's touching. So in this way, when they say the six senses, the sense of touch is what they're talking about there. So there's a difference, right, between hearing somebody and touching them.
Some people say the organ skin.
Yeah.
If that's what
Yeah,
you
but that's a way.
want.
Yeah, you could say that. Organism. Does that make sense that it's different though? Like, if you see somebody but you can't touch them, and then you can touch them but not see them, so it's two different things.
Mhm.
So it'd be touch. So in that case, it's not all the senses, because it's not the body's sense in the sense of touch. It's like like what you said. It's what you do with your skin, actually.
Oh, okay. Like sensation.
Yes, yeah, touch
Okay.
sensation, yeah.
Can you give an example with a line of reasoning to explain the non-self existence? For example, I have a desire for chocolate. So how do you use that explain the line of reasoning?
So which line to show? And let me ask you to show the lack of self-existence of. In this case, just so I get clear, let's actually clarify which object of negation. Do you mean of the chocolate or of you wanting the chocolate?
I have a desire for chocolate.
Uh-huh. So do you want to
Yet this desire is.
Oh, the desire itself. Okay.
Yeah,
Let's do this one. Let's do the example of for that again. There are many lines of reasoning. So let's use the line of reasoning of I'm just trying to decide which one to use. Let's because Nagarjuna it mentions this here. So let's use the let's use the line of reasoning of unarisen. He says unarisen. Right? In verse,
the non-self-existence. For example, the desire actually is non-existence.
Right.
It's just temporary.
Hmm? Well, actually, so when you say it's temporary, right? That's true, right? It's impermanent, so it's temporary. But still, to you, does it feel like it exists in the moment? It really exists. Right? It's temporary, of course, right? It means it's impermanent. But still, to you, it feels like. But when I have that, if the chocolate's there and I really want it, then at that moment, I know that I won't always want chocolate, right? Sometimes I'll be distracted. I'll be eating something else, or I'll be too tired. I'm sleeping, then I don't want chocolate unless I'm dreaming. But so we know it's impermanent, the desire, right? But when we have it, it feels like the desire is real, right? Is that true? In the moment, it feels like that desire is real. And so, one thing Nagarjuna points out in his teachings is, if that desire is real, right? If it's a real desire in that moment, then let's say it this way: if it's a real desire, right, then it's desire from its own side, right? It's real. It has its own quality of being desire, right? So, Actually, you check. Then where did it come from? That desire. If it's real, it must have come from. Or is it? If it's real, your desire is real. Where did it come from? Did it come from the chocolate?
From previous experience of tasting the chocolate. It's
So the desire. So like, if it's real desire, right? Did it come from the previous chocolate or from the current chocolate?
previous one. Previous past experience is tastes so good, you know the chocolate is good.
But that previous chocolate is gone. So how can something real come from something that's gone?
Because the idea of chocolate is still there. The idea of chocolate is where the desire gets
Yes,
attached.
it's very good, you still remember it.
Not to the chocolate that you just imagined or just saw, but the memory of chocolate.
So the question is like, so is the desire? So Jeff is saying now. He's saying that it comes from a memory.
Yeah,
You
that's-
agree?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So is the desire the same as the memory or different than the memory? Right, if you have memory and then you have desire, are they the same or are they different things? The memory and the desire. What do you think? Because if it's real, it has to be, what is it? And we're analyzing, right? And we're trying to check what is desire, right? Because we said it feels real, right? So then is it the same as the memory of the previous chocolate, or is it something different than that memory?
Different.
So Jeff's saying that there's desire, right, and then there's a memory of previous chocolate.
To which desire arises.
And the problem is that if they're different, right, and if desire is real, right, if desire has its own nature, but it's dependent on something else, then? Is that what you're saying? It has its own nature, but it's also dependent on some memory? Because how can it have its own nature of being desire if it's dependent on something that's, and if this is the nature of desire and that's the nature of memory, they have different natures, right? One is the nature of memory, the other is the nature of desire. So if they each have their own nature, they can't have any relationship, right?
So desire is a quality of consciousness, quality of mind. Is one of the qualities of mind. Is one of the minds.
Yeah.
And you have a memory of chocolate. 6 weeks ago you had some chocolate. It's just a memory. So then at some point, that memory is brought into consciousness. And desire is attached to it. I'm just thinking this, right?
Yeah.
To me, it's very confusing.
It becomes difficult in a way, but now we can do the same reasoning, right? Let's do the same reasoning we just did. Like, so, which comes first then? The memory or the desire?
Memory first.
And so one thing that Nagarjuna points out, right, is if, how should I say this? If memory exists 3 minutes ago and desire exists now, right, and they both have their own nature, then there's no relationship. One is in the past. Past things don't exist. Right? If it's past, it doesn't exist by its own nature, right? It's past. and desire, you're saying, is now, so they have no relationship then.
But you've just brought the memory into current consciousness. It's just arisen as an object of consciousness.
But there's no desire.
There is immediately desire.
At the same moment or at a different moment?
I'd say at the same moment.
And so then, then what Nagarjuna raises, right? So then is the desire? So you're saying they're simultaneous, right? Which is going to that term that we used. So if they're simultaneous, right? Then does memory and desire, are they identical or are they different?
They're identical in the composite. Only in the composite. That is, there is an entity that has arisen simultaneously. The memory of chocolate and the desire for chocolate. That is the object. So, but they're clearly dependent arising. So, it's just this temporal analysis bugs me.
We got into that before. And this is, I was saying, Nagarjuna relies on that a lot, really. If you start to read Nagarjuna's text, he really relies a lot on, that's one of the many of his reasonings are related to time, actually, and the sense of, because that's what we're partly getting at now, right? Is that like, and then he'll say sometimes, with that one, sometimes he'll point out something like this. That if you say, well, they're simultaneous, and then what did you say? They're one nature.
That event is one nature, but it's clearly composed of parts. So.
Right, and once it's composed of parts, it's the same as the analysis of the chair or a mic.
Understand. But that event is a unitary event.
Yeah, and part of it is part of what you see Nagarjuna getting at, right, is it's this idea of mutual dependence, right, and that what's mutually dependent doesn't have any, because one thing that's tricky, right, is another thing is this, if you look at desire, right, I'm just giving you another way of looking at it, right, so this is actually, if you look at what this verse that we were looking at, right, this is why I even hesitate when you say is desire part of the nature of, or a mental experience, right? Is if you look at so there's another way of looking at that is this is like we could do the same kind of analysis we did with the chair, right? So let's say desire, right? So there's what Nagarjuna says here, right? Is three factors, right? So there's there's the knower, right, which is mind, consciousness. Because desire can't arise without consciousness. Right? So there's the consciousness which is clear and known. Right? That's the conventional nature of consciousness, we say. Right? And then there's a clear and knowing thing, right, which is consciousness. And then there's, what does he call it here? Phenomena, right, a mental phenomena that appears, some idea of chocolate, right? And so we would say desire is in a way made of, right? Because he says they're conceptualized and superimposed, right? So the idea would be desire is either, you could say, made of or dependent on this clear and knowing consciousness and this mental image, right? So which one of those is desire? If that's what it's made of, that's what it's dependent upon, which one of and if something has its own nature, right, how can it be made up of things that are not it? Right? Whereas consciousness that's clear and knowing is not in the nature of desire. The mental image of chocolate is not in the nature of desire, right? And so if desire is made up of and dependent upon non-desire, how can it have its own nature of being desire?
So what is desire? What is your definition of desire? It's an affliction.
It's an interesting question, right? So what is the definition of, what would you say, what is the definition of desire?
How would you define desire? we define it as an affliction, as one of the minds, right? As one of the minds. So in some sense, it's related to consciousness. It is an element of consciousness. It is due to ignorance. It exists due to ignorance.
You've already implied it's emptiness. We say it exists due to ignorance.
Yeah,
Right? 'Cause
yeah,
it exists
no.
due to something other than
It is,
ignorance.
its nature's emptiness, I don't have a, but it is conventionally there in the mind. It is related to, but not the same as, all of the things that have been desired in the past, all the imprints that are there. So when we say desire, what are we saying?
It's a bad habit.
It's a bad habit. Yeah. I'm getting caught in this reverse.
Reverse what?
Analysis. I mean, it's too. I don't even know how to describe. I'm saying. So my question to you was, define desire.
Actually, I'd have to. Actually, I wonder if it's here. No, I don't know. I'm trying. I don't remember that. There's like, of course, I'm a little cautious because there are, what do you call them? In the monastic textbooks, they have their very specific, because for debate purposes, they have very, very specific definitions of each thing,
And
which I
it's
don't
one of
remember.
the 84 minds, right?
I mean, it's one of the, well, that's just one of the three root delusions,
One of the
right?
three root delusions.
So, I mean, so, yeah, I mean, they would say it's what, I don't remember the exact definition, right? But it's, I mean, they usually talk about it as an afflicted state of mind, right? And again, this isn't the formal definition, right? But that exaggerates the quality of
Mhm.
an object and wishes to appropriate it. So it's something in that ballpark.
So it's there in our consciousness based on ignorance and based on imprints.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Actually, based on, part of it is based on what? Based on many factors, right? Right? It depends on, I mean, this we can say, right? It depends on the existence of consciousness, depends on previous imprints, depends on, and then in the other one, right, in the 12 links to penetration, right, it depends on contact, and so on, right? There's like on the senses, and then contact with an object, and then, based on contact, desire, it's called, discrimination, and then, so that's true. But so what's the question then?
I don't know. I don't know. I'll stop now.
Does it exist in
You should go on. This is not teaching.
But I was trying to say this, because one thing that Lama Tsongkhapa says many times actually in his commentary on Ocean of Reason, in his commentary Ocean of Reason, right, is that, so when this is an important point though, right? So if one meditates, we're using the example of desire here, but if one meditates on desire, one sees, for example, right, that it's dependently arisen, right? That it doesn't have its own nature, right? And what he says is, so one refutes the inherent existence, right? This concrete desire that seems real, right? One refutes that, right? But then he says, right, but desire does exist as in mere name, right? As merely labeled. In other words, that when all those factors, just like Nagarjuna says vision exists in mere name, right? In other words, when all the factors come together, then there's the appearance of vision, right? When all the factors come together for a deluded person, there's the appearance of desire in their mind. And it exists as something merely labeled, right? So, in other words, when all those factors come together, there's this sort of appearance, and one says, oh, that's desire. That's labeled that way. Beyond that, it has no existence, other than, that is how it exists. In other words, it's not that it doesn't exist at all. How does it exist? It exists as something that's merely labeled by the mind, right? But it has no nature from its own side of being desire, right? So what's the nature of desire? Is emptiness, right? That's actually desire's real nature. Here's if you say, does desire have a nature? Yes. The nature of desire is emptiness. Emptiness of what, right? Emptiness of being desire from its own side. Right, but conventionally, it exists in mere name. That's what Tsongkhapa's pointing out, right? He says, so it's not, what's that?
It has to.
Because that's the object for empty. There is,
Right.
it's empty. I mean, desire is empty because it exists in mere name. Right? Otherwise there'll be no
That-
object that's empty.
Yeah, that reminds me of that part of the two principal aspects of the past, where it says, emptiness, you know, because of emptiness, counteracts nihilism,
Mhm.
right? So part of that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact, so,
Part of the two principles.
emptiness counteracts.
One of the last
nihil-
verses.
Yeah, and dependent arising counteracts, inherent, eternalism.
Right. So that's why you can't say it just it does not exist. It must exist
Yeah.
conventionally.
Yeah, which means in mere name, right?
Mere
Mere
name.
label, right.
That just.
So if you say it exists, like, I mean, like when you taste, like, you know, you can taste food, right?
Hmm?
So how can you say like, it exists mere name when you can feel the taste? It's like a food, I mean, you wanna stop, like, you know, I don't wanna eat too much food, but then you're still feeling, but you say, I mean, how can you say it exists mere name when you can stop?
Here it says, I'll read the verse about that one, right? Verse 41. The tongue's nature is emptiness. The sphere of taste is voidness as well. These are in essence Dharmadhatu and are not the causes of the taste consciousness. Right? So what he's saying there is still, like, what's he saying, right? That there was, I guess you could say it this way, right? Like, it's the same idea that we're getting at. It's not saying that there's no such thing, right? In other words, if you eat something sweet, right? There's an experience, right? Whereas if you eat a candy, right? Well, nobody's denying, right? Oh, Fidel ate a candy and it tasted sweet, right? What we're saying here is, he gives the example, right? So you were saying taste, say your sentence
My
again.
question is like, let's say like, example, like, let's say you remove a tongue,
Mhm.
can you still feel the taste?
Right, so what he's saying here is that it exists dependently, right? In other words, that, like, so let's say, so we're not denying that there's taste, right?
Mhm.
But when it says mere name, right? You know, as you were asking, how can you say that, right?
Mhm.
So what we're saying is this: there is taste, right? Yes, but how does it exist, right? And so he's giving the example. It depends on three things, right? Or it's like it depends on tongue, right? But if you just have your tongue, you have it right now, right?
Mhm.
But if you don't have anything sweet right now, are you experiencing sweet?
No.
And also, if I have a sweet but no tongue there, right? If we put a sweet in the if we have a sweet in that room, right? But there's nobody eating it, is there any experience of?
But there's a mental image though. There's a mental image of the sweet.
Right? But are you tasting it?
No. But can you still feeling though?
So I guess what this is getting at really is that it's dependent, right? Actually, in Khen's Rinpoche said on three things, right? One is your tongue, another is the sweet thing, the third is consciousness, right? There has to be consciousness there. If you put a sweet thing in the mouth of a corpse, they don't have any, a dead person, right? They don't have any experience of sweet because they're dead, right? So you have to have all three, right? You have to have the consciousness, the sweet thing, and the tongue, right? And when those three come together, then there's this appearance, right, of sweet, and then the person says, "Oh, that tastes sweet." Actually, check, like, if you like, you know, what's there to say this? Like for a young child who doesn't know that word yet, right? Then they don't think sweet, right? Like they look, like, actually, if you give it, you know, when the first time when somebody puts something like that on their tongue, they just look like that, right? And then the person says, "Oh, that's sweet," or "Oh, that's whatever," you know, like they start to just teach them, right? The word. Then the child says, "Oh, that's sweet," right? They label it, right? So that's what, you know, it's like, and then they have this idea, "Oh, that's sweet," right? Then they start to want more, right? But before they have the label in their language for what's sweet, right? So anyway, like my point is that it depends on all those factors, right? It depends on the sweet thing, on the tongue, on the consciousness, right? Then somebody teaches you to label, "Oh, sweet," right? And then you might say, "Oh, I like, you know, chocolate," right? So somebody teaches, "Oh, the name of this is chocolate," right? then you have some idea, oh, I like chocolate, right? Actually, then you see like a little kid, right, then they may be having a tantrum, I want chocolate, whatever, you know, but it's dependent on all those factors. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in
The
other words,
memory
how
is-
does it exist?
The memory of sweet is not the same as the taste.
Right.
Right, it's a different consciousness event.
Mhm. Yeah. But so do you see what, do you see what that, does that make sense? Or so it's not that there's no such thing as taste at all, right? That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, does that make sense? You said, how does it exist in mere name?
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay.
It's dependent on all those things.
Yeah.
So if you say though, is there one thing that from its own side is taste?
So you can do the
No.
action without naming it, anything. I mean, can you just can you
And
eat
what-
without naming, like?
Actually, so what Lama Tsongkhapa points out sometimes in this is that actually, and the teachings say this really, like many teachings say this, like is that already, like in other words, in a way, like the baby who hasn't yet learned the word sweet, right? Really, what Buddhism says is that because of beginningless past lives familiarity with labeling, right? The person doesn't know the word sweet, right? But already there's this sense, even animals have this, right? And the teachings say this, even animals have this sense of, it's not a verbal label, right? Animals don't say, oh, that's sweet, and I like ice cream, or something, right? Or I like chocolate, or I like licorice, or something, right? It's not a label like that, it's not it's not, they don't have those words, right? But what the Buddhist teachings say is because of beginningless familiarity with labeling, there's the habit of this is the perception of the inherent existence, right? And there's a labeling of self and other. It's not they don't use these words, but there's this conceptual mind of self and other. Like, so I want, right? So in other words, you can see it even in a baby who doesn't know the word yet, where they're like, right, this wanting, right? And they say that's a kind of labeling also, right? In other words, it's not the word, they don't use the word desire, right? But there's a sense of I want that. Does that make sense? And there's a conceptual idea when they see an object, I want. Right? And you can see even very young, right? Very young babies, they grasp like I want. And even animals have that, right? I want. Even baby animals have that, right? Like sometimes as soon as they're born, right? They want their mom, for example. They want and that's they would say that's still labeling.
That's always bugged me, so the labeling is actually irrelevant with languages. There's no language attached to it, there's no even idea of that language, it's the identification of, it's just the categorization of something.
Yeah, so label, like Khentsur Rinpoche actually said, somebody asked him about this in New York when he was teaching on the 60 verses, and what he said is that, the adult human, kind of like, he didn't use these exact words, but basically he said like, the adult human language, right, is one thing, but he said that the term label or language has a much broader application in Buddhist philosophy, and so in that sense that sort of like the inner thoughts of animals is a kind of language, and it is a kind of labeling in a sense, not language in the human sense, but that there's a kind of primal labeling or something, that's kind of a, so the term label for human beings means that, we point out like, that all sentient beings have this kind of process of, subject-object dualism, and a kind of, it's interesting, kind of labeling, that's really what he said, but it's not in human language.
So is it basically the term for what we do where we see it as inherently existent?
I guess it's this, like, in one way, like, it's hard to imagine. I mean, for us, we have to use human language, which is what we're doing right now, right, to talk about this. But part of what I think they're getting at is like, for example, a spider, right? I'm trying to think of some very simple creature. Actually, if you watch a spider, though, when if a little insect comes, right, and it attacks the spider, right? The spider attacks the other insect, right? clearly that spider is not thinking, oh, look, you know, that's a arthropod or something, right? Like there's a, like, and arthropods have good nutrients for me as a spider or something, you know, like that. They're not thinking that, right? So it's hard to imagine, or is this what Ken Rinpoche, I think, was implying, right? Like, what's the language of a spider? You know, what's the language of a fish? What's the language of a, right? But actually, well, just to give Jody some relief, right? So if you look at a well, actually, dolphins are maybe too high a creature. But if you look at if you look at a shark, right, that's eating, you know, in those nature videos, right, you can see where the shark attacks the seal, right? Or, like, it's not thinking, oh, this is a seal, and seals are different than walruses, and it doesn't have that kind of linguistic conception. Clearly, sharks don't have that, right? But it's also clear that, and again, we can only use human words because we're right. But it's clear that a shark knows the difference between a seal and a submarine, right? And can clearly, and again, I'm using the human word, label food, right? Food on that, and it doesn't label food on a submarine. So there's a clear sense of, you know, and again, like if it's a small shark and there's a bigger, you know, one of those like a small shark and then a killer whale starts chasing it, the shark knows to go away. Like the shark will go away, right? Will flee. So like that's what I guess that's what I'm getting at is that it seems that from Buddhist philosophical language, we'll say that they have a concept that's conceptual mind, right? And that it is labeling, but it's not using human words. So there's a kind of instinctual sense of danger, of food, and that these things pervade other realms. That's the idea.
So even the baby who's almost directly perceiving something for the first time, some event, some object for the first time, it's almost direct perception, but it's conceptualization by the nature. So that's the superimposition of the merely labeling aspect is just by noticing that external event or object, just by perceiving it.
Yeah, and what's interesting, right? I mean, I'm sort of, it's hard for me to differentiate, like, you know, being the psychological research on young children, but it's clear, right, that there is, even if the child doesn't have like a full concept, for example, I mean, the child doesn't know the word mom, for example, right? But it's clear that the child has a very, actually, I mean, it's actually what Buddhism says really is true, right? That there's a kind of, actually, that's a good way to think of it. Like, again, it's not verbal language, but actually the child has a kind of, what's I say this? Buddhists would say because of previous karma, right? But certainly the child has a kind of, what's we say this? A kind of language almost of that certain things are to be sought after and other things are to be avoided. That's a non-verbal language in a sense.
But they're learning otherness from the very first. They're learning otherness, which is that process. But Buddhism also says that there is a karmic propensity to do that, so that would be
Yeah.
it's interesting.
I want to, while we have time, I want to cover one other topic, because this is what's coming next. So I just wanted to say, so, you know, one thing I'll say is, so next here, like, so one thing I'll say, okay, so we got up to verse 56. So in the last class, so one thing that really is prominent in the next sections of the text are a few things. So one is this I think you guys all know. Sorry, so I just want to say, but I'll just say it and then I want to get into a couple of these. Like, one thing I think you guys probably know is that we said earlier, the mind is foremost of all, right? Nagarjuna said, the mind is foremost of all, right? And part of that is because it's the mind, right? In other words, it's the mind that creates samsara, and it's the mind that creates nirvana, right? And when the mind is conditioned or controlled by ignorance, grasping at true existence, then all the afflictive, right, we've gone through that. So when the mind is grasping at things as inherently existent, right, as truly existent from their own side, then it gives rise to all the different afflictive emotions, so desire, anger, jealousy, hatred, and so on, right? And then it creates, by grasping at those, so by grasping at true existence, then giving rise to the various afflictive emotions, then one creates karma, right? Which are actions, right? So actions of desire, actions of anger, actions of ignorance, and so on. And that propels one in the cycle of samsara for as long as one does that, right? And all of that, you can see how it depends on the mind, right? Because it depends on the mind grasping at, as soon as the mind grasps at inherent existence, then the mind gives rise to the afflictive emotions, and then based on those afflictions, one gives rise to actions, and so on, and then the whole samsara compounds itself. On the other hand, this is what Nagarjuna gets into in the next section, is when one meditates on Dharmadhatu, right, on emptiness, in a sense, right, and especially the emptiness of any object, and especially the emptiness of the mind itself, right, then one is destroying the root of samsara, right, and that's the path to liberation, right. And so if one continues to meditate on the Dharmadhatu, right, then one is undermining that ignorance, right? And His Holiness Dalai Lama often points this out, right? That in other words, ignorance grasping at true existence and the wisdom understanding the lack of true existence, right, are mutually contradictory states, are mutually contradictory, right? There is asserting that there is true inherent in existence and realizing there's no inherent existence can't coexist at the same moment. Right? And His Holiness often points out, right, and the one is not true and the other is true. So if you meditate on the one that's true, it has the support of the truth also. And so eventually it will undermine this false superimposition, the term we had earlier. And that's how one becomes liberated from samsara. And so, as Khensa Rinpoche said earlier when he was commenting on it, so the main practice here is this meditation on emptiness, or on Dharmadhatu. And in this text here it says, so one has to then, and so, let's say this. In a sense, by meditating on emptiness, right, one creates the cause for the wisdom body of the Buddha. That's what they call it, right, the truth body of the Buddha. And then one practices also method, right, which is related. I just want connecting this back, right? So the nature body, right? Remember there was the natural Buddha nature, right? And so in order to reveal the natural Buddha nature, one has to meditate on emptiness, right? And then that transforms into, in a sense, or is purified and takes the aspect of the wisdom body, right? And then if one practices the method aspects of the path, right, that's related to the developing Buddha nature, and it creates the causes of the form bodies of the Buddha, right? And there are various form bodies, right? There's the Nirmanakaya, which are like the emanation bodies, the Sambhogakaya, that's like, that has the 5 purities and exists, only Arya Bodhisattvas can sort of interact with that body, right? So I'm just reminding you, so each of those Buddha natures, is sort of, one practices the method aspect of the path to sort of take take the developing Buddha nature and sort of activate it, or to cause it, to relate to it in a way that causes those form bodies to eventually appear. And then one meditates on emptiness in order to create the causes for the truth body. Okay. And so in this text, then, Nagarjuna talks about how one does that, right, in relation to practicing the 6 perfections and progressing through the 5 paths and the 10 bhumis, 10 grounds. And he goes into detail about those. And so I just wanted to say a couple things, because I'm sure Ken's Rinpoche will get into this, and so I thought it would help, because it's in the text now. You know, so one is, a few things. One is, well, actually, one thing I'll say here is he talks about bodhicitta, right? So, in terms of the Mahayana path, right? And actually, I like this. I'll just say it. He talks about the benefits of bodhicitta here, and he says, he gives this metaphor. Actually, going back to the example we used earlier. Now it's a metaphor, but about sweet. I was saying. He says, if you throw away the seeds of sugarcane, but you want to taste sweetness, it's not going to work, right? He says, without the seed, you'll have no sugar at all. That's in verse 70. When someone values the seeds of sugarcane and maintains them well, and works to make them grow, the crop of sweetest sugar can be harvested. And just as what has come about like this, through valuing bodhicitta fully and maintaining it, working with it well, the arhats, Prajeka Buddhas arise, and so the perfectly enlightened Buddhas. So he's getting at, so first of all, the benefits of giving rise to the bodhicitta motivation, right? The wish to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings, right? And so I just wanted to say a little bit here, because he's getting into the 5 paths and the 10 grounds. So one is that he's saying there, you can't become a Buddha without bodhicitta. Right, that's clear. Whereas you have to give rise to bodhicitta, and really remember this. Like, so, in terms of the 5 paths and the 10 grounds, when you generate bodhicitta, right, is when you first enter the Mahayana path. So actually, it's interesting. You could be a Mahayana Buddhist, right, in the sense that you, like you say, yeah, I practice Mahayana Buddhism. Right? I come to a Tibetan Buddhist center. But you haven't yet entered the Mahayana path if you haven't given rise to bodhicitta. So it's a little funny, right? So you can say I'm a Mahayana Buddhist, but I haven't entered the Mahayana path yet. Because if I haven't realized bodhicitta, I haven't entered that path, right? In terms of the paths, but I can still label myself because I say I go to that center, so I label myself a Mahayana because I have some appreciation for bodhicitta, right? But so the point, so remember, I'll just go through this. There are 5 paths, right? And so the first of the 5 paths is the path of accumulation. And the point at which a person enters the Mahayana path, the first path, the Mahayana path of accumulation, is at the time when they realize bodhicitta. Actually, I'll make a point here, right? He says, it's actually, Nagarjuna says something interesting in verse 72. He says, not only do the Buddhas arise from bodhicitta, but even the arhats and the Prajeka Buddhas arise from bodhicitta. Now one could say, well, what does that mean? Because they don't realize bodhicitta. And what he's saying is, right, that they depend upon the bodhicitta of others, right? In other words, because they don't arise without without a Buddha teaching them the path to liberation, right? All arhat. In other words, like if you say Shariputra, right? Or according to the conventional appearance, right? He was an arhat. Right? So according to that appearance, he didn't give rise to bodhicitta. Right, but his enlightenment, his individual enlightenment, depended on the Buddha's giving rise to bodhicitta, right? Because the Buddha led him to enlightenment. And so even the arhats depend upon bodhicitta, in the sense of somebody else's bodhicitta. And certainly the bodhisattvas, they only arise because of bodhicitta, and Buddhas only arise because of bodhicitta. So all the good things arise from bodhicitta in that sense, right? All the positive results. And so... And then Nagarjuna gives these examples where he talks about, like, you know, what's it called, the new moon, right? He's using metaphors here. So the new moon, when and then when like the moon first starts to sort of wax, right? That's like the beginning, like bodhicitta grows and grows and grows, and then one's illumination increases or something like that, right? Until the full moon, right? And so he uses that as a metaphor for describing the process along the path. And so, so what enters the path of accumulation at the moment of realizing bodhicitta, right? That's the first of the 5 paths. And let's go through that then, because it's in the text. So then that bodhisattva, right? At that point, the person's a bodhisattva that realizes bodhicitta. Right? So then on the path of accumulation, right? The main activities. The most important ones are study and contemplation, right? So the person is studying the Dharma and contemplating the Dharma, right? And there are different subparts. There's a small, middle, and great. But anyway, there are subparts of the path of accumulation. But over the course of their time on the path of accumulation, the bodhisattva is generating some conceptual understanding of emptiness, right, through study, conceptual understanding of the six perfections, starting to, practicing those things and developing concentration among those, right? That's one of the six perfections, right? So developing the ability to concentrate the mind, right? So they're familiar, they're sort of learning the Dharma, right? And you guys know what the six perfections: giving, generosity, ethics, patience, joyful effort, concentration, wisdom. Right? So anyway, so the bodhisattva, those are in here in the text. So the bodhisattva is like, studying and contemplating, right? And one thing I'll say, because it's important, right, is the bodhisattvas continue to study and contemplate all the way until they achieve the path of no more learning. That's when they can stop, right? Because sometimes, like, people think, I said this, I think, in one of the other classes, right? Sometimes people think, oh, I studied, now I'm done with that, right? And people, actually, bodhisattvas continue studying as they go through the bhumis, so we shouldn't think we're done, then, of course. Okay, so then, and then at the point when the bodhisattva who's already realized bodhicitta, there comes a point where they have developed, this idea, right, of calm abiding and special insight. Right? In this case, special insight into emptiness. Right? And so the bodhisattva is familiarizing themselves with these things. And then there comes a point, which is one of the goals of practice. They talk about the union of calm abiding and special insight. Right? So when the bodhisattva achieves that union of calm abiding and special insight, right, into particularly into special insight into emptiness in this case, then they enter the path of preparation, which is the second of the five paths. So at that point, the bodhisattva has sort of achieved this, the union of calm abiding and special insight. And so that person, right, has realized bodhicitta and now has this union of calm abiding and special insight. Which means they have a conceptual, right, going back to or inferential understanding of emptiness at that point. They've not realized emptiness directly, but this special insight is an inferential understanding of emptiness at that point, and they unify that with their calm abiding meditation. And then that person continues to both practice the method aspects of the path, right, so the other perfections, and also to meditate on emptiness. Right, in that way, with that special, with calm abiding, and they go through again that path of preparation has four sequential levels. Like what is it? Heat, peak, patience, and then what do they call it? Supreme mundane dharma. Right? It means they have not yet realized emptiness directly at that point. So it's the supreme among mundane dharmas, means that they've understood emptiness in their meditation, as well as anybody who's not yet realized it directly can understand it. And then there comes a point, right, as that person gets deeper and deeper in their, so they still, as this person has very, very deep meditation on emptiness, actually, right? But they've not yet seen emptiness directly, right? They're getting closer and closer to a kind of non-conceptual, direct perception of emptiness. And then the third of the five paths is the path of seeing. And the path of seeing, at the path of seeing, the person realizes emptiness directly. So that's a unique feature. And that's where there's this term Arya, or noble one, right? And, this relates to actually in ancient, in ancient India, sometimes like the term Arya, like noble one, was applied based on caste. And one unique feature of the Buddha was he undermined. He was a kind of he was radical in that way, right? He didn't accept that the idea that nobility came from who your parents happened to be. His idea was that so his unique application really of this term Arya in Buddhism is somebody who's seen emptiness directly, whereas that's a truly noble being, and anybody else is not doesn't really merit that term noble or Arya. A true Arya is someone who's seen reality, who's seen their ultimate nature of reality directly. And so at that point, when one becomes, and this is important because sometimes I've had people get confused. So an Arya is somebody who's seen emptiness directly. That's different than an Arhat, right? That's not the same thing. So an Arya, right, is anybody who's seen emptiness directly in themselves. Right, so at that point now it gets into, at that point when one has seen emptiness directly, one is on that path of seeing, right, the third of those. And then that's the beginning of the grounds, right? So the grounds they call them sometimes Arya grounds, right? Because they're grounds for Aryas. So these are like levels, or they call it in Sanskrit it's bhumi, which could mean like ground or level. So those, and there are 10. The 10 here in the sutras, there are 10 bhumis, 10 levels, and so those are the levels that Aryas, that people who have seen emptiness directly, go through as they progress to Buddhahood. And so the first one actually is mentioned in verse 78, where it's called the joyful. And that's the name of that first ground, the joyful ground. The joyful bhumi. And so in a sense, I just want to go back to our first metaphor. At that point, the person has really poked a hole. Remember that metaphor of the lamp or the light inside of a vase? That person just poked a hole through the vase, right? Now their Buddha nature is truly shining forth because they've seen emptiness directly. They've seen the Dharmadhatu directly, and so they've poked a true hole. And these 10 grounds are the process of chipping away at that vase until at the 10th ground there's no, at the end of the 10th ground, one completely has destroyed all the obstacles, right? All the afflictions and their imprints. And so
So that time you have realized natural Buddha nature?
say again?
That time you have realized natural Buddha nature?
At which time? At the beginning, at the ground, at the joyful, or at the end of it?
Joyful.
At the joyful, you could say that actually what you could say is that you've seen your natural Buddha nature directly.
Okay.
I think you could say that. And one thing I'll say about these 10 grounds actually is that, so as one is practicing these 10 grounds, right, the practices of the Bodhisattva, one is engaging in, on each ground, one engages in the method aspects of the path, like generosity, ethics, right, patience, and so on. But as Kensho Rinpoche said, the primary thing that moves one that moves one along the path and that reveals one's Buddha nature is that direct meditation, the meditation directly realizing emptiness that the Bodhisattva does. And actually, each time a Bodhisattva goes from one ground to the next is like it's like, so if a Bodhisattva is on the second ground, let's say, right, the time when they go from the second ground to the third ground is actually they enter into that direct. They've practiced, the perfections for a while, right? They've done various actions to help others, but then there's a point where they again sit down. We've been doing this all along, but there comes a point where they sit down and meditate directly on emptiness, and they again directly perceive emptiness. Right? And they call that the Kensho Rinpoche will probably mention this. I want to mention it. They call it the uninterrupted path. Uninterrupted in the sense it's a direct realization of emptiness. Here they call it uninterrupted phase, free of all interferences. Right? It means it's direct perception with no conceptual.
That's the fourth path?
What's that?
That's the fourth path?
Yeah, that'll be on the fourth path now, the path of meditation.
Path
Meditation.
Well, that's not one of the bhumis.
The path of meditation is the path, so of the 5 paths, right, we have the path of seeing. So on the path of seeing, one is on the first bodhisattva bhumi. And then the other bodhisattva bhumis one progresses through on the path of meditation, the third path. So anyway, so the path of meditation, of the 5 paths, that's the third, right? I mean the fourth. The fourth is the path of meditation.
Oh, okay.
And one progresses through the other bodhisattva bhumis while one's on that
Meditation.
path of meditation. And then when one completes the 10th bhumi, right, one also completes the path of meditation, and one enters the path of no more learning, which is Buddhahood itself.
So only three paths, only three bhumis in the third path.
No, I'm sorry, in the third path, the path of seeing is only the first bhumi.
Just the first one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And all the other bhumis are on the path.
2 through 9 are in
2 through
meditation,
9, okay.
and 10 is the same as.
At 10, you're still on the path of meditation. It's at the end of the 10
Oh.
that you enter the path of no more learning, which is Buddhahood. And actually, I'll share this. So each bhumi includes 3 phases. He calls it here. So the 3, so there, what happens, right, is that as one is progressing progressing through those, there comes this point where one directly, again, the bodhisattva is directly meditating on emptiness, right, which is an uninterrupted path. Then there's the path, so here he calls it the phase of separation, and what they're talking about there is that because of the power of that meditation on emptiness, the bodhisattva, they call it, I'm going to use the word abandonment, or cessation. That there's the bodhisattva achieves a permanent cessation of some level of the afflictions. So it's one thing, like, and these are important because I think, again, I'm just sharing because I think Khentsur Rinpoche, it's related to what we're going to talk about. So a cessation means, like, in this context, means a permanent ending, right? Or so the bodhisattva permanently destroys certain afflictions in themselves, right? And so we don't have those, right? Like, we can have, our afflictions sometimes stop in the sense that, like, if I'm really angry and then I get hungry, my anger stops because I'm so focused on being hungry, right? That's not a cessation, that's just like a distraction or something. That's a temporary pause of something, of an affliction, right? But what happens for the bodhisattvas on these is through the power of their meditation on emptiness, they permanently cease, right? Or permanently separate from certain afflictions. And they actually go through on the 9 levels, they have these descriptions of like they're like gross, subtle, and extremely subtle afflictions. And then each one, they break it down, so they're like the gross afflictions, then the medium gross afflictions, then the subtle gross, then there's like the gross medium, then the medium, and then the subtle medium, and so on. Then there's like,
There's like a chart.
yeah, there's a whole chart of those. But so you're gradually through the power, but it's always through meditation on emptiness that these cessations come about. And then there's the post-meditation phase, right? So it's through meditation, like, so there's the direct realization of emptiness that leads to, or is that causes the cessations of certain afflictions. And then there's the post-meditation phase, where the bodhisattva arises from such a meditation, having achieved those cessations, which leads to more ability, right? Each time they cease afflictions, they also become more capable of helping others and of practicing generosity, patience, and so on. And so in the post-meditation phases, they practice the other perfections, right?
So
They
what
go
are-
around and practice.
What are the 3 phases?
So one is the uninterrupted phase, which is free of all interferences. Then the next phase is the phase of, he calls it the phase of separation, which is like the time of means the cessations are happening. And then there's the post-meditational phase. Right, which is the time when they're practicing the method aspects of the.
So these cessations clear your karmic imprints? I mean, that's what, your karmic imprints are being eradicated, purified with the cessations?
That's an interesting question. Karmic imprints.
you're carrying all these obscurations
Yeah.
throughout your lives, right? They're there. It was my understanding that this clears those so that they're no longer, you no longer have the imprints for anger or whatever afflictions you're ceasing.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, what I know, I mean, what the teachings say is that, I mean, what I know from the teachings is that, right, it says, you know, it's like, you no longer, that bodhisattva can no longer give rise to certain afflictions, right? I'm not sure exactly how that's connected to the karmic imprints for those. In other words, what I'm not sure of is, do they become, I'm just not sure, are they destroyed, or are they just made so that they can't be active, you know, like inactive, I don't know which, I mean, they can't become active ever, so in that sense, maybe it's, is there a meaning, I'm not sure, is there a meaningful way in which you could say they still exist, but they, I don't know, you know, I'm not quite sure. We could ask him to say that, I don't know how to, I'm not sure the exact correct philosophical way to answer that. That'd be an interesting question.
You should ask.
But isn't there a level where the bodhisattva has like, you know, not completely destroy all the delusions or afflictions, but not the karmic imprint? Isn't there?
Well, let me clarify something. Clarify the part I can't answer with that. Like, so first thing is this is so on the Khenpo Rinpoche said there, like at one point, like in terms of the how do you say this right? But the because this relates to the point I was making. Okay, here it is. He talked about this, like using that metaphor of the vase with poking the holes. That there's there's like how to say this? I forgot the phrase he used. Let's see, okay, so that there's a small poking hole space or something, where one is genuinely poked holes in the vase, right? In other words, one's Dharmadhatu, one's Buddha nature is truly shining forth, but it's to a lesser degree. And what he said was, this is important because I think it's at your point, that that's on the first 7 bhumis, right? So if there are 10 bhumis, and the first 7 bhumis are sometimes called the impure bhumis, the impure grounds. And the reason why they're called impure, to get back to my point about earlier of Arya, right? So at the time of realizing emptiness directly and entering the first bhumi, one becomes an Arya, right? Which is a noble person who's seen emptiness directly. But on those first 7 bhumis, what does it mean they're impure? Right? It means the person is not yet an Arhat, which is different than an Arya, right? Arhat is a foe destroyer, right? And so there are lesser, individual liberation arhats, right, who like Shariputra, who realizes their own liberation. But then there's the Mahayana arhat, which means, and so what is an arhat? An arhat is a person who no longer has any afflictive emotions and is therefore beyond suffering, beyond their own suffering. So on the first 7 bhumis, the bodhisattvas, because they're getting rid of subtler and subtler afflictive emotions, they still can give rise to some afflictive emotions, actually. And therefore, they still are subject to certain kinds of suffering. Right? They're not yet completely beyond suffering. So that's the sense of impure, is that although they've realized emptiness directly, and they do have cessations of some afflictions, they are going through, right? They're getting rid of subtler and subtler afflictions, so they still can give rise to afflicted states of mind. Subtle ones, you know, subtle, as they go higher, they're subtler and subtler. But even a bodhisattva on the 7th bhumi can still give rise to extremely subtle, afflicted states of mind.
But the grosser afflictions are eradicated.
Are eradicated at that point. They can give rise to the subtlest of the subtle, actually, right? If you go through or some very extremely subtle ones. But then the unique feature is on the 8th bhumi, right? So the 8th to the 10th are called the middling level of revealing the Buddha nature. Middling seems funny because the 10th Buddha Bodhisattva is quite something, but compared to a Buddha, it's only middling, right? Because the Buddha is the great, you know, the great level of revealing the Buddha nature would be Buddhahood itself, right? So that the 8th to the 10th bhumis are called the pure Bodhisattva grounds, and they're pure because that Bodhisattva is an Arhat already, whereas they no longer have any afflictive emotions, they no longer have suffering. But what they have still, and this, I think this gave your question, those bodhisattvas on the 8th to the 10th bodhisattva grounds, what they still have are the, so they no longer have what they're called, there are two different kinds of obscurations. There are afflictive obscurations, right, which are the actual, some kind of actual afflictive emotion, or afflicted state. And then there are the obscurations to knowledge, which are sometimes called they're the subtle imprints of those previous afflictions. Does that make sense? So that bodhisattva on the 8th ground no longer has any afflictive emotions, or gross, they no longer even have, how should I say it? They can't give rise to any afflicted emotions, but they still have the subtle imprints of their previous afflictive emotions that block them from being omniscient. That's the idea. That's one of the differences between them and a Buddha, is that they have these subtle imprints of the previous afflictions that stop them from having the omniscient mind of a Buddha. So those bodhisattvas on the 8th to the 10th bhumis continue to practice the perfections, including the meditation on Dharmadhatu, in order to remove those subtle imprints of the afflictions so that they can achieve the omniscient mind of the Buddha. That's the idea of those last three, the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis are for that purpose, in a sense, of removing the obscurations to knowledge. And again, these obscurations to knowledge are the subtle imprints from the afflictions that the person had experienced, that the bodhisattva experienced previous to the time when they achieved the 8th bhumi.
Those are called obscurations to
To
knowledge.
knowledge, meaning the obscurations to the omniscience.
Right.
So if you raise like you become an aharat without, so you can practice bodhicitta, that's when you can practice. You don't need to practice bodhicitta, and then you can practice bodhicitta after you realize your bhumis.
Yeah, so the idea so you mean like a individual arhat, not a
Yeah, you can
Mahayana
just
arhat.
decide to go to become. You can practice path as an aharat, then you reach a bhumi, then you can practice bodhicitta.
Oh, no.
You can do
So,
that.
no, to clarify this, so it's two different things actually. So, in other words, there are two types of, let's put it this way, actually there are three types of arhats, to clarify that. So, one way of categorizing. So one would be the individual liberation arhat. So that person didn't give rise to bodhicitta, right? But motivated by their own renunciation, right? Their wish to become free from samsara, right? So they didn't give rise to bodhicitta, but they did give rise to renunciation, wishing to be free from samsara. And then they didn't enter the Mahayana path at all, actually, right, at that point. So that person, just by meditating on, developing calm abiding, practicing ethics, right? And then developing calm abiding, and then meditating on emptiness, that person achieves their own liberation from all the afflictive emotions, and then they achieve their own nirvana. And so that person achieves their own liberation, and they're an arhat, but they're not a Mahayana arhat, they're an individual liberation arhat. That's different from the bodhisattva who goes through generates bodhicitta at the beginning, and progresses to the 8th bhumi, right? At that point they become an arhat, but they also have many other qualities that the other arhat doesn't. Does that make sense? Because they've been practicing giving, ethics, patience, almost out of time, we should stop and say, but so that person had a different path, and they achieved the Mahayana arhat. Then there's the Buddha, who's also an arhat, right? Buddha, of course, also has no afflictive. An arhat is anybody who has no afflictive emotions, right? So those are different kinds of arhats. A Buddha is an arhat in the sense that, of course, he doesn't have any afflictive emotions. But also the 8th bhumi bodhisattva is also an arhat. He has no afflictive emotions, but he is not omniscient, or she is not omniscient like the Buddha. So they're different. And that's also different from the individual liberation arhat, who achieve their own freedom, but without bodhicitta motivation.
So if you don't have bodhicitta, that means your emptiness cannot increase.
What that means is that that person who achieves the individual liberation, according to the Mahayana, that person achieves their own liberation, right? And they are free from samsara. But then they say that person remains in some kind of meditative state on freedom. And then eventually they say, then the Buddhas come and say, hey,
That's nirvana.
nirvana, their own nirvana.
Right.
Right. But then they say the Buddhas come eventually and say to that person, other sentient beings need your help, wake up, come practice bodhicitta. But that person doesn't go back to suffering. They don't suffer anymore, but it takes them a long time to become Buddha, they say.
So
We
can
should
you
stop.
connect all this to the winds, please?
What's that?
Can you connect all this to the winds,
Which winds?
the tantric winds, the dissolutions, all that?
Well, actually, Kenshin Rinpoche did say, he pointed out that, you know, from a, like, in the, what's it say? He pointed out at one point that, from a tantric point of view, the natural nirvana is still the emptiness of mind, but in that case, it would sort of particularly emphasize the emptiness of the most subtle mind of an clear light, right? Whereas that's the most important object. You know, because again, like what's there said? Each conventionally existent object has its own, you know, can be analyzed to see its emptiness, right? So from a tantric point of view, you would say that the most important object to meditate, to understand the emptiness of, is that most subtle mind of innate clear light. So the emptiness of that would be.
But absorbing the winds is consistent with the cessation of the afflictions. It's a similar path, I think.
The cessation of the affliction. That's actually that only in the tantric perspective. That only the one achieves that state of the cessation of the affliction. So the equivalent of the eighth bodhisattva. One realizes that at the point of realizing in the Guhya Samaja way of categorizing it, like of that language. That's at the point of the meaning clear light. That when one realizes the meaning clear light after having realized the conventional, what's it called, the example clear light and the impure illusory body, and then one realizes the meaning clear light. So at the point of realizing the meaning clear light, one has achieved arhat, the tantric arhat level, the permanent cessation of all afflictive. Does that make sense?
One further question.